my illustrious, my magnanimous guests, I'm going to say. That's the word I used earlier today. Mr. Tim Thompson, and then please introduce our guest.
It's so good to be with you today. Those of you who had to watch me dancing before this, I apologize. And those of you who have to listen to me out of breath now, I apologize. But I have all the energy we need to today to get through our topic. And I'm going to introduce Dallas Taylor, who joined us today. We have a great case study with Dallas of somebody that has kind of gone through an entire process. And we can't wait to kind of dive into his story and hear some of the mystery behind it and even some of the latest trends that are going on with you. So welcome, Dallas.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
So Dallas, for anyone who doesn't know you, give us some sort of I'll put you on the spot. Give us some sort of a clever spiel. Who are you? What do you do? What's de facto?
So I'm a sound designer. Used to work at over 10 years ago, worked at Discovery, and before that in LA for G4 and Fox and NBC. Started de facto sound about 10 years ago, and now have a team of 5 people, 4 sound designers and a producer, and do tons of like trailers, promos, documentaries, animation. Kind of our biggest client list is we do tons of work for HBO, Netflix, all the kind of major players like Discovery and A&E and all those, plus kind of, big sneaker commercials and car commercials and all that stuff. But even one of our biggest clients is ourself. Tease.
I love that.
I think we're actually like our third biggest client, just ourselves, based off of our own original content.
I love that. I love the fact that you had to sort of tee me up. Like, Joel, in case you're not listening, this is my tip off to what we'll talk about later. Well, Dallas, do you remember maybe a year ago, you and I did an episode of the RevThink podcast? You were kind enough to come on and share your story. And I'll never forget when you talked about, I lived most of my life in this phase called pick me, pick me.
Oh, yeah.
And the gradual evolution, crawling your way out of that pick me season of your business, I think is really, really cool. I should also just say, full disclosure, Dallas is a member of the RevThink family. You've been through the Jumpstart Accelerator and participated in Confab and some of the other things. So there's a lot of, we've definitely been on this journey a bit now for a while. But Tim, let's just also invite everyone here. As usual, this is an open forum, so if you have questions, you have comments, you want to ask something directly to Dallas, even if you want to jump in and join the conversation, just raise your hand using the whatever little widget we have here in Zoom. But Tim, I think I'm going to pass it to you and let you start the conversation with this idea of there are some companies out there that are thriving despite things, and what can we learn from some of those people?
Yeah, that's some of our hope today is for you to kind of relate to what it's like to have gone through a process and a method of somebody that was looking for direction, kind of trying to figure things out, and then can get to the other side of that issue. And not only that, but even right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Dallas, but like you haven't necessarily lost momentum, even regardless of the crisis. So there's something that is, I don't want to say bulletproofing, but kind of like, edging you forward regardless of the greater economics. But let's start with the moment we met. I believe it was New York City, right? You were at
That's a good memory.
Entrepreneur session, and you came up to us and you were like openly reaching out and saying, hey, I might need your help. Why don't you kind of just take us back to that moment of what it was like, what the struggle was like, and what you were thinking in those moments?
Yeah, so I think this was in the winter, roughly, of 2016, maybe early 2017. So this was around 7 years or so after I'd started the company. And I think anybody who's had a company over 5 years know that there's kind of a shift that happens after the 5-year mark. And then it feels like it's kind of the similar situation here at the 10-year mark. But at the time, for years, I'd really been wanting to, I don't know, my biggest passion is just like, I'm a sound designer. A lot of people don't think about sound. I think that there's like a cultural problem with the way that we frame sound and our sense of hearing versus the other 4 senses that we have. And we were doing lots of, a lot of like the way that we grew was doing kind of like pro bono director's cuts and just trying to just work constantly, no matter what, like, getting paid or not or whatever, just to kind get things going. Of course, now I have to focus that. But there came this time where I was just like, I just love podcasts, and I've always loved kind of like radio and storytelling and sound in general, and that intimacy of being having a voice a millimeter away from my ear, and while I'm kind of in the world, but not, you know, of the world, but not in it or something, just because I have this narrator. And what greater kind of way to explain kind of the power of sound is, than through podcasting, which is kind of a messed up word for how artistic the medium can be. So at the time, I spent an entire year kind of developing these 2 episodes. I spent a lot of my own money, a lot of gut churn doing that, because it just, to do it, we just had to go so extreme. But at the time when we met, it was right after we had published a few episodes, and it got picked up by a really big podcast called 99% Invisible, and they have about 1 million listeners. So when that podcast played our podcast, we kind of immediately like spiked up to like, I mean, it went from like 0 to hundreds of thousands of listens like overnight. And so we had just met kind of in this very interesting point where it's just like, you know, my bread and butter is de facto and promos and trailers and documentaries and animation. But this new thing kind of happened. And I knew I didn't have it focused in my mind when it started. It just, I knew that I wanted to impact people genuinely in the normal like culture with starting to become more conscious about sound. So it was much more of like a mission driven thing. And then it was more like just fingers crossed that this thing actually makes money.
But I remember the conversation where really you were at the point wondering about de facto and really focusing on trying to keep de facto around. And there was this side thing called a podcast. And you revealed in our conversation that, yeah, you have a large group of following, but you didn't necessarily be able to put those pieces together. Yeah. And you as the entrepreneur were really kind of just looking for some foundation to probably make a paycheck every day, right? Like there was still, you know, trying to bring the bone broth home and make sure your family's fed.
So the other thing that was really concerning, you know, there's so many different aspects of stress, but one of the worst aspects of stress that I don't like is when things get slow, everyone starts to sit on their hands and they're looking to me to tell them what to do. But I'm freaked out because I don't know what to do, and all I care about is getting work in the door. So all of that to say is that people sitting on their paid people that is coming out of your pocket or your company's pocket that are sitting on their hands, not doing anything, is the worst possible thing for a company. It's for the morale, for the financials, all kinds of stuff. So it's just like, I knew I had to find a way to keep us busy all the time. If I'm paying people to do stuff, I need to have processes in place to keep people busy, especially when I'm freaked out. And because I don't need to project that onto the team when I'm freaked out because I don't know what's coming, you know, in a month or whatever, and I'm making new relationships or traveling. I just want to know that we have a whole process in place that if something gets done, there's another thing on the docket and another thing and another thing. So the original content was part of a solution to that.
Yeah, let me just stop right there because I think that's a key element to understanding the role of a business owner and having a clear vision of what you want to do with your business and what you want to do with your career, so that there's slow moments where if you look at it in, we'll say like normal terms or normal eyes, we say like everything's slow, no one likes us, we're going out of business. And we tell ourselves these perpetual lies that will never get on the better side of it, right? And there's that feast and famine mentality where I learned it from Garson Yu. He basically said, when we're working, we're busy, and when we're not working, we're really busy. And it's that he had a clear idea of what he wanted to contribute to the industry. So he almost saw the downtime as the opportunity to do those contributions. And we were never confused that we were working for the downtimes, because there will always be work on the other side and we'll get past it. But it takes a strong leader to have a mentality that way. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I think it's important.
This might ring a bell because I don't know where I read this, but it was something that I've seen come up quite a bit, is that strong companies know how to capitalize on their waste. And the most expensive waste that I have is someone sitting around like archiving or something. Like, we got to archive. That's cool. But like paid salaries, especially when we're really slow, 3-4 people just sitting around just going, well, we don't have any work, let's just sit around. So I just I'm very frugal. I'm a poor kid to begin with. I grew up poor, so so now that I'm kind of on as a business owner, I just don't want to waste money. And so yeah, at a certain point, I was like, we've got to take some risks and chances. And since then, we've expanded into other aspects, and not only are trying to do the podcast, but that's just one element of what we're trying to almost like supersede. We have our niche for sure. That's really powerful and strong. But now I'm just trying to kind of expand my own name as a brand, as a speaker, and then kind of like the podcast, which is its own little like ball of business unto itself. So I kind of have 3 brands.
Let me interject this, Dallas, because I think this is something I remember from the story when you and I first connected, and Tim in New York at that conference, and you were saying, hey, this podcast is really taking off. I'm sort of curious how I can use that to drive more attention and awareness to De facto, which is a natural thought, because I think all the owners here have that question of how can I create some sort of content or IP or product or something that's going to drive business to my business. And when you started telling us about the numbers and the potential, I think our question was like, De facto is great and everything, but who cares about De facto? You've got a hit podcast on your hands. I think we need to introduce you to someone at CAA and get you an agent, because that is a business. And that started a conversation that went on for another year or so. But I think it's just an interesting example of your downtime is not simply, I'm going to invest in marketing. Yes, you should be doing marketing, of course, but it's also time to create and build. What is it that you want to do with your career, with your business? What do you want to make for the world? I mean, Tim, like you said, Garson, he said, this is the opportunity where we're going to move the industry forward, because we're going to create something that's never been created before. And I have this capacity sitting here, I'm paying for it. I'm going to lead and just really get the most out of my team in order to make something really, really valuable. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
That moment? And was that a shift in your brain when you started thinking about, wait a minute, the podcast is not just a tool to drive leads to De facto?
So many things changed. I think you mentioned PR at the time too, because I definitely remember like the agent, and since then I've been to CAA. I actually took a meeting not too long ago about that with some people over there. But yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is like it's. I've been doing it, like now I have a PR team. I just hired a PR team 2.5 months ago. So like today I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal about crowd noise and how important it is to our brain. And then yesterday was in Mental Floss and like all these things. And I learned this thing about even, we built this thing to where the entire team can be creative and busy and psyched because we all care about this thing. With that, other people resonated with it because it was authentic and it wasn't selling. It's a free podcast. Now advertisers come in and they buy impressions, like, you know, how many people can we speak to by selling our soap or something. But what's been interesting about this is like the thing that's like incomprehensible is the stuff that just falls from the sky when you're communicating to a large audience. It's easy to go like, okay, if I'm gonna make a YouTube video, or, you know, if I'm in an animation studio and my people aren't busy, and I'm going to make kind of a YouTube series on space, and they're going to be like 2 minutes long, and it's just going to be like space factoids. That's what I would do if I was not doing the podcast. It's easy to go, well, you know, maybe we might get 50,000 people who watch it, but like, how do we get a return on that? YouTube is notorious for not having, you know, it's a monopoly. They don't pay a lot for their ads, whatever. It's different. Podcasting, luckily, is actually a pretty premium space for advertising. But it's not even that. Like from the podcast, we make more money from the like 100,000 people listening to it, and then like 0.05% of those people work somewhat in the industry, and they go, oh yeah, De facto. So like we get these really large jobs from these really interesting places. Like I've heard just wild things before. Like I pitched Nickelodeon once and did a whole thing, and then of course in the round table, someone was like, I listened to your podcast and I love it. And it was just like a seed planted in the entire team. Same thing with like HBO. Like one of the reasons that we not only kind of landed HBO, but then also expanded on it is I had a contact there, but then the contact put us on the radar, and inevitably one of those people out of the 20 was a podcast listener. So they could go like evangelize for the thing that we make. So it's, you know, it's a hard thing to kind of like preach about doing original content, because I'm just kind of talking about the success part of it, but it did come after a lot of gut churn and a lot of, you know, turmoil of whether or not this is right, and money, frankly.
So let's get down to like some of the like specific strategy, because I think what people often hear when you tell a story about making a podcast or other people talk about making an independent film or whatever that bring them success, they think the answer is making IP. If I could just make my own IP, I'll be successful. Or if I, you know, make the most beautiful commercial, that reel will get me the next work. And there's definitely a correlation of the work that you have and be able to make a leadership piece or a breakthrough piece that will bring you work. I think that's true. But we work every day. Every project we have, everything that we're contributing, we're putting our best effort into it. So it's not like, I remember when we made Seven, it's not like we were making the Seven title sequence, the breakthrough title sequence. We were doing I was doing one of 4 jobs. It was one of the things I had to deliver. It was insane. And I remember the moment when it hit was amazing. But while you're doing it, you really are trying to get the deliverables out the door, and you don't have control over that. So I don't want to make it sound like the answer is, you know, invest, double down, make your own IP, take large risks. It's not really that.
No.
But what you did and what you've been able to do is actually kind of convert your knowledge. You have a specific interest. You had an idea or a vision of how that could be understood, and you really kind of like made a platform, or you made a thought, and you put some thoughts out there that then other people can relate to, and that. I don't know, it's like sharing yourself, exposing yourself, or being transparent to the way you think and how you process really begins an inbound opportunity to engage people, and then they approach you first. So
in addition to solving the problem of people sitting on their hands, I also am relatively paranoid about the finite amount of time that we will be the hip thing on the block. You know, there's so many competitors in this space and edit places and all this stuff that, you know, that will continue to one up on positioning. And I'm just like, why did I, you know, not think of that?
You have to compete with the thinking podcast. You know that we're right on your tails, brother. We're taking.
So what I was really paranoid about is, like, you know, when I am not when De Facto Sound, I want it to continue. I hope that my kids take it over, but how often does that happen? I have no idea. But I just want something that I wanted early on to start building something that was a retirement type of positioning for myself, that that could then I don't know, like just that thought leadership that could permeate over time. Like I felt like when I did it, and that was 3.5 years ago, and at the time I was 36, 37, I was really looking 15 years ahead in the future, because I was like, what's it going to be like, you know, when De Facto's 20, 30 years old, and, you know, I may be transitioning to retirement or whatnot. I mean, I really want to be valued for writing and thought leadership, and then let the other things kind of come in with that. Because there's always, I don't know, with sound, it's like the pick me at mentality is just, it's so, I've been in relationships before, with really, really solid creatives and stuff, but there's this lopsided shift in power and positioning where it gets to a point, if someone takes up enough of your share, like if someone's 20% of your work, or 30% of your work, God forbid 40% of your work, or more, you stop talking like a real person to that person.
Right.
It's like you can't communicate
the gorilla client.
with a real person. And so just really like reevaluating, really diversifying De Facto was a big thing here, and that now we're seeing that as being majorly helpful, because now where we're seeing, you know, the live action shoots are pretty much quiet for the most part. All of the animation people that we're talking, or at least that we work with a lot, are now starting to ramp up. The promos are ramping up. So like on one, being diversified, some things are dropping off the map, other things are flying through the roof. So like somehow we're still making it through this, due to just my paranoia of 3 to 5 years ago.
So yeah, let's get practical, because I think something I'm hearing, I'm trying to maybe recognize some of the patterns so others here can say, oh, okay, that gives me some ideas on where I can go and what I would do. I think one thing that's so interesting about your story, Dallas, is that the podcast was a way that your expertise was able to be shared at scale. And my thought is you're building community. And it's like this, Tim, it's like what you talk about in your 4 stages of a career. It's that move from the auteur stage to the curator stage, which involves community. And I think it's such a smart play when you can think of ways, how can I invite others into my story at scale? Yeah. So it's no longer just a business where I call people and they have a project, they hand me a project, but now the way your firm is positioned, of course, the way you diversify into a podcast, whatever your thing is, doesn't have to be a podcast, but there's something there that it's inviting people at scale to join your story. Like they believe what you believe. They want to be a part of something exciting. And I just see how that has so many strategic byproducts where you talked about bumping into somebody on an airplane and talking to somebody at an agency who's heard the podcast. And there's all of these random intersections that you could never, ever sit down and predict them. You just had to start creating, sharing your expertise at scale and build a community, and things show up.
Yeah. So one of the things we say is we work really hard and sometimes get paid for it, right? That's one of the mentalities we have of trying to build a platform and share. What I hear at Dallas in your story is the desire, really this idea of building an asset, building something that you can pass on. And what I identified in the 4 stages, the 4th stage, the collector stage, is that where you leverage that asset. And for me, like the greatest thing we have in the creative sphere is influence, our opportunity to have made something and put something out there that people have, consumed, they can relate to, know what you've contributed. And it's really based off of this idea of eldership, that at some point it's our turn to give back. So we have to start building pieces of our experience and our time that we've taken from the creative industry and be able to contribute that back into the economy. That's the scale point. And that tipping point for you is so exciting for me because it's the one where de facto, you were in the auteur stage, the 2nd stage of your career. And when you talk about splitting it, what you said is like, I'm going to leave de facto as an asset that takes care of business. And then there's this other thing I'm going to pull apart, and it's going to be about something else. It's going to be about other people and their stories. It's a place where I'll work hard and maybe get paid for it. But if I give back, then there's something I can rely on later because the inbound or the conversation that it's inspiring builds itself up. And I think, to me, that's why we'd usually say recession proof. But right now, I feel like that's where you're COVID proof, where you've contributed enough to the economy that the economy is now something you can rest on. And it's still going to you, looking to you for your expertise and asking you, personal experience and professional questions that you can put yourself out there and contribute regardless of what the economy is doing.
Yeah. And I just think it's important also just to keep people jazzed and psyched in the company to be creative, because that's one of our biggest problems. I mean, not problems, just like when you're just creating things for other people, sometimes it's hard to see the forest from the trees on just creative in general. And so I think it's really easy to leap to making kind of original content that's like, oh, I make original content, then I make money and one-to-one thing. But it's not that. It's such a holistic approach for the team, the morale, keeping them busy while you're freaking out, because you also don't need to be projecting that on the team. Giving people the freedom in places where there is no client to really like impress, be the client. When we get press and stuff like this, it's just like the pride with the team is such a big thing. We feel like we're on a mission more so than just like, always doing the client work, which client work is what pays our bills and it's incredibly important. But I feel like going back to that thing about when somebody's 30-40% of your client base, it's hard to have a conversation. Whereas in this case, a lot of our clients kind of, a handful of them listen to it and kind of, or at least are aware of the importance of it. So it gives me a greater seat at the creative table in a lot of ways.
I love when you talk because, I'll say this, what I've recognized when you've gone past that tipping point, it's like taking the blue pill, right? Like all of a sudden your mind actually shifts and you see the same people and the same jobs and the same clients. It's the same exact resources you've always used, but you see them differently. You see them like assets. one of my favorite stories is from our friend Garib, who ran Wizard magazine for many years. And one day he realized his guys were sitting around. They're basically a bunch of comic book geeks, and they knew things. And he thought, wait, printing a magazine is the same as printing sports cards, like those little trading cards. So he thought, you guys should start making trading cards. And it's the exact same resources, the exact same material, exact same thoughts, but a totally different output, totally different thought leadership, totally different build up.
You know, one thing that's really important,
differently.
I think people overthink of the difficulty when it comes to making original content. We're definitely thinking, I think that in a lot of ways, our minds are stuck in the 90s on the way that like content is produced. And then we go, oh, in order to do content, I have to make a documentary that's an hour and a half long, then go through the film festivals, which I have a very bad distaste in my mouth for the gatekeeping of films. I think that film festivals in general are like a gatekeepy thing where just a handful of tiny people get to decide the future for a lot of people.
Unless you make the film festival, then you are the gatekeeper.
But now you can bypass all of that stuff. And I think that generally like filmmakers and animators and people have this like really negative attitude toward YouTube, like it was YouTube of 10 years ago, or podcasts, like it's podcasts of 10 years ago. Like some of the best content in the world is happening there, direct from creative all the way to the consumer. And it's just so there's no boardrooms watering it down along the way. It's somebody in this thing that loves this thing. The other thing before we go that I wanted to mention too is making content and stuff. So it doesn't have to be long. It could be 90 seconds long and affect people and get 1 million views. The other thing is it makes it blatantly obvious when you make content for an arbitrary number of clients. Like you sent that email saying like, never say check out, insert the blank, because it's such a cliche thing. I think a lot of content that I see from people in the industry is like, so when you look outside of it, it's so blatantly obvious for like 3 people at a specific network. And it's like your entire brain shifts in a weird place. So you don't have to do a thing, tutorials. You don't have to do that. If you want to, sure. You don't have to do, I did something about sound, but that's still pretty niche. Like you can do something on if you love space, the In a Nutshell videos are just brilliant, and it's done by a design agency, and they've got to be the busiest ones out there nowadays. I have friends at Identity Visuals that are now doing all this original content from board. Like they did a board game that raised $400,000 on Kickstarter.
They're an
animation studio. There's so many opportunities if you just get on top of it all and look at
it. You have to be willing to see it. It's so true.
And it doesn't have to be super expensive, and it doesn't have to be 90 minutes long. It's just like making content, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and you'll eventually get better at it too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually going to highlight Tony's comment here. Thanks for this one. It says maybe you can highlight the fact that creating for yourself allows you to express your creative chops through one filter, yours. The work doesn't get watered down by clients, their briefs, other opinions. And I've heard a lot of clients say that, like, gosh, I really wish my studios, agencies would show me more. What would you do if all the decisions were up to you? And I think that's such a freeing comment, is to realize that your clients are actually asking for that. But then you realize, well, wait a minute, not just my clients, but maybe other people in the world that believe what we believe. I was going to share an article that I came across.
Before you go off, I want to just highlight a little piece of what you said to add some clarity too. If you're going to make your own piece, don't make it to impress your clients either. If you're not making something for your client, if the work you're doing with your clients isn't bringing out the greatest aspect of creative, don't go spend your own money to make something to impress those same clients. Make your work, do it your way, that internal voice, and let it come out. You might find a totally different audience than you ever expected before. That's what we're trying to get people to be inspired.
The world is huge. I mean, think about the things that you're passionate about. Like, what are you doing when you're not thinking about work? What subreddits are you on? Like, what type of content do you follow? What are the things that like you're super passionate about? And you just so happen to have an animation studio or a live action studio or a sound design studio or whatever. It's like, I don't remember who it is. Somebody owns Digital Domain. Is that Michael Bay? Somebody like that?
Yeah. Well, it is Michael Bay now. Yeah.
Yeah. So like,
it was for a while. I don't know who owns it now.
I heard it referred to as like Michael Bay. That's his sandbox of like, they do client work, but like, then you have a creative, maybe this was Joel that mentioned this to me, but there's this idea of like, I've started to take de facto in a situation where it is still very high level client work, But at the same time, I also treat this as my own creative sandbox. When you own a studio, you can speak things into existence just by
That's what
communicating.
Lucas with ILM. Lucas created his own characters. He didn't just make a movie. He created many more assets as he built them.
And we all have that opportunity if we have people on payroll.
Exactly,
and if the PPP goes through, you have 2.5 months to make stuff for yourself. If you're not super busy.
Use the government's money to do something.
See, that's clever. That's clever. Well, look, we're 2 minutes over our half-hour slot, so we should wrap it up. But I think it's easy to say that, Dallas, we should have you back again very soon because there's a lot more great material here.
Thanks. I want to ask Dallas a couple of these questions that people ask. So if people don't mind just holding on for a couple minutes, because there's a couple of really good ones, Dallas, and I think that these are genuine questions. So before we just skip.
Let's do this.
We appreciate it.
Let's let everyone go that needs to go that only slotted the half hour. So thank you for being here. I'll share one article with you before I go because Tim, I shared this with you. We both thought this was good. The recession will be good for you. It may not seem like it, but it is. And I'm going to show you this article, really some nice controversial and rev thinking, I think, in here. So I'm going to share that. So if you have to go for this half hour, please go on, have a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow. But we'll continue with some more questions and answers here with Dallas for those of you that can stick around. So Tim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for staying, Dallas. I appreciate it. I know we only booked you for a half hour, but if you have a few more minutes,
I'm good.
Here's the question that I love that Vance asked. He said, hey, Dallas, any struggles with imposter syndrome when making your own content? Definitely something that gets in the way every time we go down that road. I think that's a kind of a genuine question there because that's real. Like, what makes it legitimate, or how do you know you're not just making something?
I've done extensive thinking about this, and with other people that I am impostering as well. So I thought when I launched this show that it was a direct rip-off feel from 99% Invisible, and I thought as soon as we publish this thing, and as soon as people start to figure out how we did it, that people would be cynical and be like, you can't, you're just ripping this thing off. But the fact is like, it's a genuine place. It's original stories. It isn't in a style that many people have developed over the years, but just the fact that you're doing it and putting your own voice or whatever on it is going to naturally give it its own feel. Even the people that I think of that I'm pretending to be like, or at least I did before, because it took me 3 years really to find the voice and the way that I communicate and the quirks in my voice that I think are important for like hosts and stuff. But never once in the entire history of the podcast has someone been so negative to the point where it's just like, you're ripping this thing off. It's never happened. If anything, it's more like, what 99% Invisible is to design 20,000 hertz is to sound. And it's like, you can't get a better, in the podcast world, you can't get a better thing. So naturally just having your own voice, which through the process and your own people and all that stuff will give you something. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's like that whole idea of like everything's a remix. It is. Yeah. But the only way you find that new thing is to do it and then do it again and then do it again and then do it again. And then eventually over the course of now we're almost at 100 episodes. I'm starting to find our own voice. I know what the show sounds like in its own distinct way, but it took me 90
what I hear you say is yes, imposter syndrome was part of it, but have some confidence. You are unique. You have a unique way and unique process out there, and it's worth processing and putting out there and publishing so that people can understand it.
People love information. Like I just looked at YouTube today and someone was like, how does a offshore oil rig work? And it's like 600,000 views in one day because it's just like, oh, I never cared about that until I saw this pop up on YouTube, and then 600,000 people decided to watch that today. Yeah. So at least for me, information is something that just people crave. And
I remember in the early days when I was starting to do the RevThink podcast, I very much had imposter syndrome because I thought, who am I? How dare I be the person that's going to somehow bring this information to the world? And I stumbled across a quote that really rattled me. It like turned my head around 360. And the quote was, "You're the expert at how you did it." And Dallas, when I think of you and the way that you're the how behind how you're doing 20,000 hertz, like, yeah, you're totally the expert at how you did that and how you came up with the idea, how you executed it, how you built it, how you got that following and so forth. And once you realize that, I think you start to relax a little and you realize, wait a minute, I do have a lot of expertise to share. I don't need to be all messed up in my head and afraid.
A lot of
All
the
right, so
stuff.
Dallas, I have another question for you. This
Sure.
one comes from Masha. She says, Dallas, can you identify certain choices that you made and or continue to make as a business that you think set you up for the success during this time? So is there something specific that you could encourage others to get started and never stop doing in order to be bulletproof like you are?
I mean, I'll start with hiring. I would, early on, I mean, this is going to feel like it's a left turn, but the very first thing I thought about was proper hiring. Because I think that we have this mentality of like, oh, someone shows the effort to just walk into my studio, therefore I should feel guilty enough to give them a job because they did that. And it's like, okay, that's awesome, but they're not the best person in the entire world for that job. So, so setting up really clear boundaries with that, because early on I had a couple hires, like one was a friend. Anyone who's had a business for 10 years knows exactly how that went. And then another one was like somebody, like we didn't have a, it was a young company. We didn't have the reach that we have now. But over the years now, just to get a job here, first of all, it's like a full US search. This was the last hire we had was 3.5 years ago. That's because hiring got so serious. And in that round, in the last two hires that we had, we have over 1,000 resumes that started with questions that would knock out about 2/3 of the people immediately. Like, do you know this? Do you know that? Like, do you have a reel? Like that immediately knocks out, 4 out of 5 people. So we go from 1,000 to gets that's probably weeded down to like 100, then a full blind audition process where it's not just me responsible for hiring the next person, it's the entire team, blind, not even seeing people's names, only watching reels, and then narrowing that down to say 10, and then full group interviews to 10 people, followed by a couple of people flying in, meeting in person, going back and forth, offering jobs, seeing if it's the right thing. But all of that, just being so extreme with the people that you actually hire. I couldn't do this if all day long I was training another person. Like if just every, it's a revolving door and there's another person I have to train. It's just so key to have people that you just really trust. And hiring is something that I think notoriously most people that I know don't do nearly to the extent that they should.
Dallas, you are so right on with this. The hiring profile. So one of my sayings is that if you're going to change what you do, you have to change what you believe. And what we often forget is that we have to have common believers. The people that you hire, the people on your team have to believe the same thing you believe. And we often just go for the first person or a recognition or some kind of referral through some crazy grapevine, but we're not asking people to really understand, like, do you believe what we believe? Do you think we will get there? Or do you want to be part of a team that understands success in this way? So I know at RevThink, going back to like, we work really hard and sometimes get paid for it. You have to believe that in order to work at RevThink. We've had people that have worked for us for 2 weeks. And then at the end of 2 weeks, they think like, I don't even get what I'm doing. They don't understand how to create value, how to generate leads, how to have an original thought. Those items don't really set in. So you're totally right on the hiring part of it.
We've had all of that before.
Part of what you're doing. Yeah. And by the way, it's one of our biggest investments as a business owner. I think that's why, like, a downturn that we're experiencing, we're losing those investments in these key people. And if we're letting people go, we're losing that core team. But I think the teams that have the common belief are the ones that are making it through in a stronger way, because they can double down together and prove that they're right.
I'll flip over to the opposite side too. It's just, first of all, it's an incredibly daunting task to hire. It's so overwhelming how much, but if you make a bad decision, it's going to cost you 5 times more. But then on the flip side, somebody was mentioning this on the Slack channel, letting people go when it's appropriate, because that can be a complete suck on your entire organization with one person that you tried to make work, and they tried, and it's just not the right fit. But first of all, you're holding that person back from actually finding the right fit for them. I had somebody who was an incredible photographer, but wanted to be a sound designer, incredible talent, but like just never put that time and effort into that because all of his passion was in photography. And of course it was a nasty like breakup because it had to, I mean, just like laying someone off is never good. But from that point he went on, and now he's just like he's an amazing, like well-respected photographer. But it was like feeding 2 birds with one seed. It's sometimes these things have to happen.
I think you're right. Like it's important to remember you can let people go so that they can thrive, and give them permission to, or you're the one that almost has to be like the parent bird that pushes them off the nest.
And they will most certainly hate you. But like if it's it's a risk for the entire team to have one piece of the puzzle that's missing, and doing hard things like hiring takes for freaking ever. Laying someone off is awful, and I've only had to do it a couple of times. But really chiseling and crafting and what is that iron sharpens iron idea, and it's something that's a continual process of just sharpening, and that's the podcast is that for us. The creative is that. But yeah, now having people where even the youngest people on our team are 3.5 years in, it's like the level of trust is just building immensely.
Yeah, I find that this crisis has been has been finding some weak spots in companies and trying to help people walk through it. But I'm also saying, like, what a blessing that this crisis is the problem, and you can honestly let go of people you've been trying to think through for 1.5 years and use the crisis as the moment to let them out. And then the company culture is not affected immediately because everyone's working it from home. So it's a really unique opportunity to right size your company, to reassess where you're going, to reset that vision and to push it forward. And it feels strange that you're taking advantage of a crisis in a way and making the best of it. But that's what the entrepreneur does. It looks at the situation, understands the needs and the resources, and then right size things to make that vision successful. But I want people to just understand that, like, the timing is right now and you can do it.
I'm thinking of the classic, the bus principle that Jim Collins talked about in Good to Great, which served me so well over the years. And the basic concept is when you find a true quality person, that's the sign. Like you just get them on the bus, you'll figure out what seat they go in later, because the where the bus is going is evolving. But if somebody's not a good fit to be on the bus, then it just doesn't matter. There's not a right seat for them, and it's time to let them.
And everyone knows it. They just won't say it because no one wants to be the one who says that this person needs to go. Yeah. But as soon as they do go, everyone's like, "Oh my goodness, thank you," because that's just the. And I don't want to, start throwing out, laying people off or whatever. It's just when you're sitting there, staying up at night, worried about this one person, and you're thinking about this constantly, and you're sick to your stomach over the hard decisions you have to make. You just have to make the decisions, because it's a liability for everyone, including yourself, at the end of the day, to not have the right fits across the board.
That's what leadership is about.
Firing.
Be a leader.
Here's my little cheat. I think you and I talked about this in that Slack channel, Dallas. My little cheat is if you're having a 5th or 6th or 7th conversation about how someone is not fitting in or working out or doing their job, it's just time to say, I can't have an 8th, 9th, 10th conversation about this. Like,
you've had 3 too many.
Like you just basically say, I don't need any other information. All the information I need is we're talking about this for the 10th time, and we're moving on.
I'll say this, if anyone out there is thinking about this, struggling with this, or need advice on this, please just call us. We'll help you process. We come across really harsh right now, but we really do want to help you think through it, because there are investments that you made. There's some important characteristics of these creative people, but there's also the need for your vision to work itself out. So I think it's a little bit more strategic, but we know there's an overall benefit. Each of us have experienced overall benefit of what's there. Hey, it's a 1/4 and I'm 15 minutes late to my previous call, so I'm sure we're holding other people up as well. But Dallas, I just want to thank you so much for being vulnerable, talking to us, sharing your expertise. I think your story and your career and the things you're doing are very inspiring. And you've definitely kind of found some secret keys to the kingdom that when you share that, other people are inspired by it. So thank you for being on our.
Well, don't get me wrong. I have gut churn all the time, and it's a daily event. It's like, I feel like we're all living in a world where it's just like high highs, low lows, high highs, low lows. Right at this moment, I'm feeling really good right now, but tomorrow something could make something feel bad for a few hours. So we're all going through this like roller coaster of stuff, and that's just even in my circumstances.
And that's why we need each other. That's why I love thinking of it felt like when I was in this industry, we were all competing with each other and we didn't share. What we've learned is the secret in RevThink is actually by sharing, we're building each other. And our events like Cohort, this daily briefing, having open conversations and trying to build that community of people willing to share. 7 Ingredients Slack channel being one. I just find it so amazing, and all ships are rising with the tide. So I appreciate you being part of that.
Well said.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. We hope this was helpful to you. Joel, I thank you for putting this together and inspiring. I had a really bad idea to go into this conversation, and Joel vetoed it and brought in Dallas. So thanks for setting the record straight today and making this thing great.
Well, I have an even better idea too. There's 21 people that could go to their podcast player right now and subscribe to 20,000 Hertz. We're in the middle of a 2-part series on Mel Blanc, and it's fantastic.
Oh, I love it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the whole, every show we're doing right now is like, how much joy can we put into this show? So no COVID talk, all just like happy stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
That's a good plug. I love it. All right. Well, the link is was in the chat there in Zoom. So be sure to go and check out the 20,000 Hertz podcast. Dallas, thanks again. Tim, stay safe there in New York. And everyone, thanks for sticking around for the extra 17 minutes here past the bottom of the hour. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for being part of the daily briefing. Until next time.
Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
See ya.
Thanks.